Joining me now is the co-founder and president of Real Clear Politics, Tom Bevan. Tom, thank you for joining us, man. It is just hectic, crazy stuff going on here. You know, I heard about a blue wave. I heard about a blue wave for probably close to a year now. When push came to shove and the election happened and is happening, I didn't see any blue wave. What happened?
I mean, listen, once again, I think the polls to a certain degree and the pundits, once again, the media just absolutely, botched this election. Look, there were two sets of pollsters. There were two worldviews out there. You had the sort of more, let's call them Trump-friendly pollsters like Robert Cahaly at the Trafalgar Group, Susquehanna, Insider Advantage, Rasmussen, and then you had sort of the traditional mainstream media polls: ABC News, Washington Post, New York Times, Siena, Emerson, those sorts of NBC Marist, and those folks overestimated Joe Biden's support across the board. In some cases, by upwards of 8 to 10% in some of these states, and so I think there was a distorted view of what the reality was on the ground, particularly in the final days, because President Trump sort of went on a tear. He was all over the place. He was firing up his base, and there was movement in some of these battleground states. But if you had those other pollsters in there, I think a lot of folks waved it away and said there's no real tightening. This has been a really stable race, and so that, I think, contributed to the idea that we were going to see a blue wave on Tuesday, and it did not happen.
So here's what happened. In 2016, I saw the same thing happening. I saw the turnout, the enthusiasm for Trump versus Hillary Clinton, but the polls were saying Hillary Clinton was going to win. The New York Times had her at 90%. This same thing started to happen. I pointed that out, what you just said. You look at what over the last 2 or 3 weeks prior to the election, President Trump was getting 15, 20, 25,000 people. Joe Biden was having 7, and the polls weren't budging towards Trump. And I said, the same thing's happening. But here's the pushback I got. No, they got burned in 2016, and they're much better at it in 2020.
Right.
But in fact, they weren't, were they?
No. And I mean, how many pieces did we read that said, hey, everybody, relax. 2020 is not 2016, and here's why. Biden's favorables are higher than Hillary's. Trump's an incumbent. I mean, there was the list went on and on. District polling was much stronger for Biden this time around, and it collapsed on Hillary. So there were a number of excuses. And once again, look, this is what happened in 2016. The polls weren't that bad. Certainly the national polls were better, and some of the state polling. But what was bad were the pundits, and they filtered all of the data right through this preconceived narrative that there was no way Donald Trump could be elected. He's a clown, he's a loser, whatever, and Hillary's this statesman-like figure. Once again, they took this data, right, and filtered it through the lens of there's no way Trump can win because of the economy, because of COVID, because of all of these things.
You are touching on something so important, and it's something I've been saying. I've been doing this for about 15 years, 12 or 14 years on television. It's a laziness. So pundits, rather than doing their homework and thinking about what's really going on, they'll take a poll and say, wow, this kind of fits my narrative. I kind of like this, and I don't really have to do the homework myself. So I'm just going to run with this. And it really, what ends up happening, Tom, is when the actual votes happen and the polls are so far off, it frustrates, it creates anxiety with the voters who expected the poll to be right and that pundit to be right, when the reality is they were far away. So how do we fix this?
Well, so again, it's complicated, right? Again, you had a series of pollsters that were pretty close, right? That had it more right than anybody else. And then you had this other, and we're a polling aggregator. We put those two together, and we had 5 states, I think, that were about a percentage point or less in terms of being competitive. Arizona, which is going to be, I think, in the final analysis, competitive. Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, right? All of those were very competitive. Some of the states, but there were misses. We had Ohio. Our average had Trump leading by 1%. Yeah. He won it by 8.
Hey, Tom, I'm running out of time, and I just have to ask you this question. You brought up Arizona. Was Fox premature calling Arizona as early as they did? What are your final thoughts?
In my opinion, they absolutely were. I mean, Joe Biden's lead was, I think, 200,000 votes with, I think, 70-something percent. There's no reason to call that race that early with that much vote still left out, especially knowing that the election day vote was skewing toward President Trump heavily, and their refusal to call Florida or Ohio or some of these states where President Trump had a very solid lead and 95, 96, 97% of the vote in. They snap call Virginia. They snap call Arizona. I think they botched it. I really do. And then they went on air and basically said, no, we're 100% right. So we'll see if they are or not. But I still think they made a mistake in doing it that soon.
Again, Tom Bevan, co-founder of Real Clear Politics. Great site. Go there, everybody. Check it out. Tom, thank you.
Thanks, Eric.